Hi, I'm Suzanne Ehlers, and this is Not Really Strangers, the podcast where we explore just how connected the refugee experience is to our everyday lives and to the social issues that matter most to us. Thanks for joining us for another conversation with a brand new guest, here to share the story of how they came to realize that their story and the refugee story were intertwined. By the end of this episode, you'll see that in this global community, the distance between us is often much shorter than we think. Let's dive in. So welcome, Thao. It's so nice to see you. I know our listeners won't be looking at you like I am on the screen, but hearing your voice. Thank you for making time today for this conversation as part of the podcast, Not Really Strangers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. We have a couple of questions to go through, but I'm also, kind of free-forming it a little bit and hoping that even though we've not had a lot of really any prior connection, I think our teams and colleagues have connected. But I hope the questions allow us a chance to get to know each other and maybe a couple of different areas of shared interest. So feel free to pause or ask me a question back or whatever comes to you while we're exchanging.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Thanks. So the first is kicking off. Where are you dialing in from today?
I'm dialing in from Berkeley, California.
Beautiful Berkeley. I'm in Washington, D.C., not far from a place that I think you lived for many years, out in Falls Church.
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Falls Church.
Do you come back out this way pretty often?
I do. I try to come back out at least 2 or 3 times a year because I'll have work in D.C. or, a lot of my family, most of my family still lives in Fairfax and a little bit further west. So
Okay.
I have my brother's there still with his family, and all my aunts and uncles are in Falls Church in Fairfax.
Oh, nice. Well, just DC. I'm in downtown DC at the office for USA CR. So stone's throw from Falls Church, and I have lived in this area since like the year 2000. I guess I'm now in Upper Northwest, like close to the Silver Spring, Maryland border. You might know it up there.
Yeah, totally. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. I always wanted to spend more time in DC, but my mom wouldn't often let me take the metro in. She had a laundromat starting about when I was around 12. So I had to work out at Fairfax Circle. That's where the laundromat was.
And you started to play music around that time. Is that right?
I did. I started teaching myself guitar around the age of 11 or 12. And I would play out at the laundromat. I'd get tips from customers.
Oh my gosh, our dryer broke down a couple of months back. And so I spent a lot of time in various laundromats scattered through the Silver Spring, Maryland area. And there was never a talented 12-year-old girl playing guitar. I would have loved that.
It was a really interesting cross-section of people. Really, yeah. Not a bad
laundromats they're kind of like the public bus. Laundromats are fascinating.
Right? And everybody's got to get something clean. So you're watching people interact who might otherwise not be interacting, which is lovely.
Yeah, I agree. It was funny. It was like an inconvenience in that I didn't have a dryer, but I could take multiple loads and get them all done at the same time, which for efficiencies, and that's what I'm into. That was like such a treat. Wow, that's like fast. So you mentioned Berkeley, and we talked a little bit about Falls Church in the DC area. Where do you call home, as it were?
I've been wondering that myself more and more. I do call the Bay Area home. I've been here since I graduated college. I went to William and Mary in Virginia and I graduated in 2006. And the week after that, I went on my first tour, and I essentially have been touring since then, but settled in San Francisco at the end of that first tour. So I had whatever bags I had in my guitar, and I stayed in San Francisco. And I moved out of San Francisco in around 2019. So I consider the Bay Area my home. Absolutely. And then because that's where my sort of chosen family and community are. But when I come home to the people who raised me, that can't be replaced. And I guess I feel fortunate that I can call a few different places home. But at the same time, sometimes I get if I'm traveling too much, or I have, the good fortune and sometimes downfall of the touring musician is sort of an unmitigated level of freedom and transience that can and cannot be your downfall or be pretty detrimental, depending on how you can relate to it. And the depending on what your relationship is to it and how healthy you can keep that. So I guess what I'm saying is both and neither, and yeah, home. My entire life, I think, has been marked by that question, and I chose a job within which I could ignore that question for long stretches of time.
Mm. Either ignore it or do what you've just said, which is sort of build, kind of almost like a multiplicity of homes. And like I saw that as there's this famous, I think she's famous. She runs the Black Women's Health Imperative,
Mm-hmm.
Linda Gowler Blunt, and she talks a lot about asset framing and deficit framing. And
Yeah,
like how we understand, so it's two sides of the same coin, but like you could either say this is sort of a deficit of the profession, or you could say this has allowed me this sort of like liberation. It's allowed me to think of home in like new and creative ways. That's how I heard it when you were talking about it.
absolutely. Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I do think everything is a question of framing, but like a really authentic interrogation of it. I think sometimes if it's almost like a way to take the temperature of how well I'm doing. You know, basically how um right, is it deficit or asset? And if you need to take a step back or you need something to recharge or recalibrate, I guess a marker is when the thing that you chose and that you've primarily loved and has been an asset starts to feel like a deficit. So that, and it's an invitation to look at what else is out of balance.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that reminder.
Yeah, I like that authentic interrogation. I wrote that down, kind of an invitation to do that. Well, back to DC, if I could, since we
Hmm.
know that we have Falls Church in common. You grew up there as the daughter of Vietnamese refugees,
Hmm.
and I'm wondering if you knew other kids whose parents were also refugees from your Falls Church experience.
I knew other Vietnamese kids because our community, not in school, but my friends outside of school were the children of my parents' friends, and everyone was very close, and that bond of even if they didn't know each other before, anyone who ended up sort of settling in the area within the Vietnamese community built very familial ties. The kinship was very strong, and so I grew up with yeah, two or three or four other girls who were daughters of very good friends of my father, and so we had that. But otherwise, I didn't realize what a refugee was for a long time, and that distinction, um, I didn't assign that to our family, even though it was obviously very true. I thought of us more as immigrants, and there was such um, there was a stigma with that word, with the idea of being a refugee. To me, I was um, so I guess I didn't think a lot about what our identity was because it was late 80s, early 90s in Virginia. I was trying not to. There was I felt a lot of imperative uh, to sidestep the whole thing, to my eventual uh, true deficit as well. But and as far as kids from other countries whose families were refugees, we didn't Right. It was never discussed outwardly. He just knew when other kids were from other countries. And thankfully, Northern Virginia has, from when I was, yeah, I mean, as early as the third grade, I remember being in class with a lot of kids from different countries. And I'm
Mhm.
very grateful that that felt natural.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's still the experience for so much of the DC suburbs, both
Hmm.
Virginia and Maryland. I was just sitting with a mentee of mine over lunch who was up in like Gaithersburg, Maryland over the weekend. And I could tell she was kind of like, I was up in and I was like, Gaithersburg is and Germantown, like they're among one of the most like diverse zip codes in all of America. Like yeah, I mean, really extraordinary. And DC, sort of proper, if you will, doesn't enjoy nearly. First of all, it's just a smaller population than we have in our suburbs. But it's interesting to think back of, yeah, you being surrounded in a classroom by. Do you remember any teacher or community member that was maybe outside of your sort of immediate sort of familial bonds that you felt, I don't know, particularly seen by or particularly welcomed by? Anybody that stands out for you?
Oh, I always had a remarkable relationship with all my teachers, and I'm so grateful to them. Um, but uh, they offered, um, I mean, from kindergarten on, there was this sense of steadiness and stability and encouragement that I always felt from teachers, and I really needed that. But in particular, my fourth grade teacher, I mean, Mrs. O'Flaherty, Carolyn O'Flaherty, I can still remember she had, and also great fashion. Things like now that I look back and I really
Mhm.
appreciate, but before, when you're 10 or 11, you don't necessarily, you clock them as having a very distinct presence, but you don't,
Mhm.
but then later you realize, they were very cool and
Mhm.
deeply compassionate. My high school English teacher, Pat O'Brien, Mrs. O'Brien at Thomas Jefferson High School. Yeah, they all. I have such appreciation for what they encouraged, especially my relationship to language. And I think the English language is so important to me because, and I think a lot of people experience this, growing up in households where English is not the first language, is that, and if you're born in this country but your parents are not, there's obviously, people, there's a lot of discourse around it. And I'm no different. The ability to communicate was really important to me because it was not always available in these ways that I needed to be communicated with and the ways that I needed to communicate. And so when in starting school, and starting to operate primarily in English, I'm still conversationally fluent in Vietnamese, but I never went to school in Vietnamese. So my literacy is poor. And that's something I've always wanted to work on. But so the ability to move fluidly and as precisely as I wanted to only happened in English. And so any teacher who could recognize that and help foster that, I have such deep appreciation for.
Mm. There's a woman I follow, Jess Mack is her name, and she's a blogger and somebody that I worked with in kind of nonprofit spaces. And I was
Mm-hmm.
just listening to her read on Substack. She's now reading some of her pieces. And she talks about language as her currency and that how words, it's like been at the center of everything she's done well, right? Either she's writing a blog or the way that she speaks or the way that she's able to facilitate a meeting. Like I just was thinking about that notion of currency, like how those of us, and clearly, maybe I think we share sort of a pool here that we're both in, like it's so, and back to assets, it's like my most valuable asset is the words that I use on the page or in conversation or to foster connection. And I was thinking about the teachers, like that you mentioned, how they have to recognize performance, like they have to recognize the job the student is doing. But then there's the teachers who sort of like think about like almost leadership at a student level, and like not just that you're doing your work, but how you're doing your work and how you're showing up. And to be seen by a teacher like that, it's like, it's just so gratifying at that age. I remember like that heart swell, and like just, it was sort of, for me, irreplaceable in those years.
Totally. I absolutely agree. And I love that you said Hartswell, because it does feel like that, especially when you don't exactly have access to anything else that, of there's no Hartswell anywhere else, right? Like it could very well be. And so, and a teacher who can recognize that there's this additional element of care and concern and attention that that would greatly benefit their student. Just to take that additional time and energy is, I mean, true God's work,
Yeah, life-changing.
Yeah.
Life-changing. This is a question, if you're comfortable sharing it, but I'd love to hear whatever part of your parents' story you can share about leaving Vietnam, about coming to the US, about those early years. Just, is there any piece or pieces of it that you're willing to share in more detail, what you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I hadn't really investigated until maybe within the last 8 or 10 years, because growing up, no one, and I'm sure, we all hear this a lot, that you don't hear a lot of the details, and you don't necessarily want to ask, because you're then asking your parents or your family to re-enter territory they might choose, they don't want to. And it feels, it doesn't, it feels reckless to ask them to go there. And it feels, so anyway, it wasn't until the last decade or so that I wanted to ask my mom more direct questions around all that. And she always would share stories, not about how hard and devastating everything was, but just details around it. So I did know that she worked for the embassy. She worked for the South Vietnamese embassy, and was stationed in Laos when Saigon fell. And then my dad, and they did not know each other in Vietnam. My dad was a helicopter pilot and was flying in the leading up to April 29th, April 30th, around then. And then he had to get out of there, and they met, I believe, in a refugee camp in Guam. And then from there, decided, it was easier to be sponsored out as a family. So they decided to get married, and then were sponsored out to Arkansas, and then to North Carolina. And then from there, they had my brother in North Carolina, and eventually there was work at Metro that my dad was able to get through some of his friends who had come up to the DC area. And that's why I was born after they came up here.
Do you know what hospital you were born at?
Fairfax Hospital, which is now Innova. Yeah.
That's where I had my first daughter.
Oh,
The
yeah?
one that's going to Mary.
Oh, perfect.
I mean, honestly, that was like, there's some sort of kismet. Yeah. When you said,
I love that.
and then Metro too, like how fascinating that, first of all, I mean, I think of Arkansas and North Carolina, you mentioned Virginia earlier, and then we went to explore just like how diverse and at least aiming to be inclusive the suburbs of DC have tried to be over the years. Arkansas and North Carolina, those are different circumstances. And no mass transit. So how interesting that, Metro comes up in DC and the family is relocated, and
Right.
Yeah. Like the landing spots always fascinate me. And sometimes families, and I've talked to many who identify either as refugees or come from a family that's experienced displacement, some end up in those original spots and many don't. But it's just interesting to think of the winding. I talked to someone earlier who, when they came to the US, his mom and he were on one side of the United States, and his aunt and her family on the other. And at
Mm-hmm.
first they were sort of, devastated. And the aunt said, well, no problem. We'll just take a bus. And the people were like, well, a bus between like the Bay Area and Maine,
Right.
you can, but it's going to take a long time. And just
Yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of confronted with, just sort of the magnitude of what the move was and this new country was. And all of this always just gives me, I don't know, just really new and different insight into, a country that I've known since my birth, but not in all of these ways, and not through these
Mm-hmm.
different lenses and experiences. It's fascinating. You have one brother born in North Carolina. Any other siblings?
Nope, nope, just him.
Just him.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you say it's been sort of about a decade, I do know from reading about you that you and your mother and the band
Mm-hmm.
in 2015 were the subjects of a documentary, which I'll tell you, I've had a hard time finding. I've not been able to watch it, although I would love to.
Oh, I'll ask my management to send it to you. It's the link has since been yeah, it is hard. It's harder to find.
It's hard.
So we can get you a link to it.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
love to
yeah.
watch it. I mean, I haven't watched it, but then I read, interviews and press about it. And you talked in that about it getting more comfortable to talk about your family's history. And I'm just wondering, like, how has the relationship to that changed or evolved, over time? How would you describe what it means to have been maybe more proximate to the experience your mother in particular had in that journey?
Um, that trip to Vietnam, and the only time I've been to Vietnam, was so remarkable and so remarkably intense that it took me years to even start to process it. And yeah, so that happened, right, 2015. I was done with the album that would become A Man Alive, but after I had finished it by the time we went to Vietnam. So Temple, the one that was released in the auspicious period of May of 2020, was the first on record processing of that trip. And it took that many years to uh, metabolize and render work from it. I think so. It's so hard to prepare for a poignancy and an intensity of feeling that you can't even fathom. It's like, so I'm saying, I think I think families, I think, my parents' generation, we all tangle with, if maybe for extremely long periods of time, maybe forever, like just being stymied by the fear of confronting all the loss. Um, and so I saw dimensions of my mom that I had not seen prior and will never see again. And I know that, and that's fine. I understand. I commend her for having gone there ever once, and and she didn't want to go, and I don't know if I remember talking about it a little bit in press, but she refused to go. And she had so many barriers up around it because one, she worked for the South Vietnamese government back then. And she was like, maybe I'm still on a list, and then I, in completely in an uninformed way, was like, no, you're not. Of course you're not, but I don't know. She's not. Right. But anyway, so I'd call her, I'd say, we're going. She'd hang up. It just was touching this nerve that we didn't understand how, I didn't know how to proceed, but eventually she did agree to go. And I think she loved it. But at the same time, everything happened that she was afraid of, which was she didn't recognize anything. And the place that she had loved and was planning on returning to within a year or two of her, she loved her work in diplomacy, but had fully intended to go to have a family in Vietnam, live there, be there. And like, Vietnamese people love Vietnam in my experience. And so she suffered. Right. So the idea of losing a home that you love so much And then you don't know if you should go back, because part of the reason you don't know if you should go back is you don't know what is left of it that you remember. But then you also don't necessarily feel like even her home for the past 30 years doesn't necessarily, at that point, she hadn't been back to Vietnam in 43 years. So I think just watching that happen, watching her see, I have an aunt, a cousin of hers, a first cousin, who they were extremely close growing up. And my mom didn't tell her that she was coming. And we showed up at our house, and the film crew was there, but we didn't record this part. And my aunt comes out of the house and she looks at my mom and she says, she can't believe it. She's beyond, right? And she just said, I didn't think I would see you again in this life. And, and it was remarkable to see. And then within 25 minutes, my mom was like, we have to go, because she just couldn't, she just was not able to stay any longer in that kind of sorrow, which I totally respect, but it was so painful to see it. So that trip, what was that trip? That trip was so many things, and it was beautiful, but it was just, I found it important to bear witness, and just see this dimension of her. But also it was really hard to go there. And but I also saw her haggle, she obviously had this, she was back in her element. Like, she knew that my entire life, when my brother and I would go out to restaurants, we're ordering for her. Not that she can't, but that it's just easier if we do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then over there, she's ordering for me. And if we, over in the States, like, if we're out, we're asking for directions, but it was just incredible to see her that way. And, but it still wasn't, it's not enough. Then I realized that's not enough that she's decided she's not going back again, and I believe her. I don't think she will. And so that is really, it's really fascinating. And I don't know, just this source of, like, there's, I don't, displacement to me is just only as, I've never, and I am deeply lucky to have not experienced what that is, but I have seen it very intimately. And to me, it's just this endless source. It's like a sadness with no end in a lot of different ways. And it's just the myriad tools you have to develop to make peace, just continually make different kinds of peace with the fact that that you are stateless in this way, spiritually and physically. I don't know. Because I love these people so much, I don't want to know that they've endured such pain, but that's the truth of it. And so, the least I can do is just bear witness and see and be available to listen if they want to talk about it. That was a long, I don't know if I answered your question.
I mean, you not only answered the question, I mean, this is back to this sort of like love of language and words. Like, I think of this concept of sorrow. And I think we talk a lot about sadness and grief, and there's other words that populate our days. I'll tell you that I don't come across sorrow often. And to hear that described, that meeting between your mom and this childhood friend, and almost, at some point kind of incapable of holding the sorrow of all that's lost, and you can sort of, you're not confronted with it. And then all of a sudden confronted with it, and your body is trying to make some sense of that. I mean, that really stood out at me. And then you said something like how stymied we are by the fear of confronting those sort of massive fissures and moments of loss. That also It really resonates with some of the other conversations I've had, like how almost paralyzed in the face of confronting and reckless. You like, I don't want to recklessly ask people to revisit this, and if they're willing, what does it mean to bear witness in a way that has like moral courage and has compassion? And there was just so much about that, the describing of that trip back that's really just beautiful. I would love to watch the documentary if you're able to share. I mean, I also love the notion, and you laughed when you said it. You were like, Vietnamese people love Vietnam. Like, that is the part of displacement that I will tell you many don't understand. They think, oh, well, your country was unsafe, and so you've resettled somewhere else. Ukrainians, you're making good money in Poland and contributing to the GDP. And you ask any Ukrainian on the street, and they're like, I just want to go home. Or there's that Olympic swimmer Yusra Mardini, who after 10 years out of Syria just went home, and in Syria is devastated. She's like, you don't even know a landscape can be that destroyed. And then you're in Damascus. And she's like, and yet people, like, there's this like light inside of people that they're like back, like that they're back home, and maybe they will stay, maybe they won't, but like to be given the opportunity to go back and kind of like reckon again. There's just so much that you said that like pulled those threads for me so tenderly. It was really a beautiful, yeah, beautiful story. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And there's this other piece, and it was made specifically for Prospect, this art biennial in New Orleans called Prospect. So a friend of mine is a filmmaker, and he works in the sort of fine art world. And actually, I was just with him at the Smithsonian because we had an event, in part for the 50th anniversary, but also to talk about the film that we made. And the documentary I can send, but I would love to send you this film because it as far as what I contribute is a way more. I've just had longer, and I'm in a different place now, and I can synthesize things and better understand what I'm trying to honor and what I'm trying to communicate. But I'd love to send it's a shortish film. It's like maybe 25 minutes or so, but it exists in installation. So it's not available online.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah, but I'd love to send that screener to you because we're hitting upon, and his work is all around diaspora and solidarity building within the global South. But this is his first project. He's Vietnamese and based in Saigon, but this is sort of the first one where the entire crew is Vietnamese, and for a few of us, it was our first time really trying to go there and be in conversation with it, and like how to honor the people we come from, and but still, and then what is it to be the generation after that, and anyway.
You mentioned the albums, both Man Alive and then Temple, as the sort of first kind of on record processing of that trip, is what you said, which I thought like, well, actually I have a question before that. You said something about like, looking back and now you have maybe better tools to sort of process or synthesize. When you look back and there's like a recording or an interview and you find that you were less capable or less sophisticated about the synthesis back then.
Right.
Do you have compassion for that younger self, or are you embarrassed by that younger self? I'm asking for a friend because
Yeah.
I feel like I wish sometimes that I like didn't do some of my like immature processing like out loud,
I really appreciate that question. I think the older I get, the more compassion I can have for myself. Because if not, just the suffering is, I want, I'm interested in not courting any more suffering than is necessary. And I haven't always been that way. And yes, so I do have more, and I understand what it was and where it was coming from. And I think for me, everything was, there were just so many blocks and barriers, and I know what they were. I had a lot of internalized racism. The things that kept me from truly being proud of who I came from, or, or like embarrassingly deep rooted. So I had to acknowledge the shame that I felt about having shame about who I was, on many levels. And Temple is also about, I had these, I'm queer. I hadn't been out publicly because of, I mean, a lot of it was cultural. A lot of it, I was sort of, it got really complicated within my family. And so I didn't know if I didn't feel that I could ever fully embrace my Vietnamese heritage in the way that I didn't know if I could be a part of the culture. Turns out I can, but
Yeah.
there are all these things you think can't happen. And then when you presume everything is impossible, that you can't move, it's the paralysis you were talking
Right.
about. And
Right.
right. So just sort of all of the major components of my life that I think make up a lot of who I am, I like couldn't pursue. And it was becoming extremely untenable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I know when I was unable to process, I know what it was, but my work suffered, everything suffered, but I couldn't. That's why, making A Man Alive is about my father. I knew I needed to address that, right? Temple is about being Vietnamese and queer. I knew I needed to, like, I couldn't proceed in my life as a person until,
Yeah.
and, for better or for worse, but truly, luckily, my work, my livelihood is I get the chance to like try to better understand myself out loud.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I am really, truly grateful for that.
Yeah, I had a question about music, and I think you've already answered it, but I just want to invite anything else, like how music has helped you explore family history. I mean, you just talked about like how, at least how I heard it, is that music and those two albums in particular have been these tools to, like to take you to a next level of like personal liberation and self-love. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and to hear that, by the way, like you can come across a song on Spotify and enjoy it, and then to know now that there's this meaning that accompanies it. I mean, I don't know, have you ever been on Song Exploder? I would love,
Well,
some of
yeah,
those songs that I've heard a million times, and then
yeah,
to hear the musician say, "This is what I was going through when that lyric came to me," and then at the end he plays it in its entirety. And I have found with my
totally.
daughters, those are like just the like the multiplicity of dimension that
Mm-hmm.
gives me now as such a gift in hearing your music. Like what, I
Yeah.
just love it.
That's funny you should bring that up because I was the guest host of Song Exploder for 2019 for the whole year.
Really?
Yeah. I did have one
I didn't know that.
episode. The song, so originally I was just a guest on it in 2016 for A Man Alive,
Okay.
and the song is Astonished Man. But then my friend Rishi, the host, he got in touch a couple years later and said, because he was taking a break to work on the TV version of it.
Oh, right, right.
So then he asked me to host, and I loved that stint.
Mm.
It helped reignite. At that time, I was stuck on making Temple, and so it was so lovely to get to talk to people about the craft of songwriting and to talk to all these different artists about their routines and their dedication, just to see the love for,
Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
so to deconstruct other people's songs, it did get me back into album making mode.
Hmm.
But that's so funny that you should bring that up.
Well, I'm going to go back now and listen to any episode from 2019 just to hear you on the other side of the microphone. I'm
Oh yeah.
curious about that. And then, of course, when you were featured yourself in 2016, one of my favorite interviews ever is with Yo-Yo Ma. And I remember we were like on the Taconic Parkway up in New York, and my daughters were much younger. And oh, podcast, mom, we don't want to listen to a podcast. And I was like, just with this one, just trust me, you know? And it was really like a spiritual experience for us to have him, talk about what he didn't like and how his playing has changed and how he also recognizes evolution and sophistication in his own musical renderings, for someone who is seen as so talented and such at the top of his game. Like that,
Totally.
that for me was really instructive. That's just a beautiful concept, Song Exploder. So you've put some new podcasts on my list for my morning dog walks. So I have only a few more questions for you because I know you have a lot going on in your life and you're generous to take this time with me. The podcast is called Not Really Strangers, and that's one word we haven't used with each other at all. I'm
Right.
wondering, like, what does the concept of stranger mean to you?
You know, I this is another great gift of my job is, and perhaps why I sought it out, but I feel often a lot more comfortable with strangers than I do. And with the more consistent with the people in my life who I truly know. With strangers, there's what I love about it, and what I love about performing is the invitation that we have to be in communion with one another. And in truth, right, we don't know each other, but in truth we do. And the beautiful, the one of the reasons, probably the main reason I hope I get to do this for the rest of my life is the way those distances are covered and rendered. They're just nullified for beautiful moments. And, at the end of the show, you all will go home, we will keep going. And there's a certain kind of, that's a different kind of loneliness that you have to figure out when you're a touring musician, is like how to be so connected and then actually be, you're moving on. And
You're moving on. Yeah.
And everyone here has a life and a home that they will return to. But that's separate. So I believe strangers are gifts to one another because we can be distilled. There's just you can actually connect in this way that is so pure, and it can be very pure and very honest and uncomplicated by what it means to. It's just a different kind of accountability. I think we need both, but I think we underutilize what we can be to each other as strangers, and I don't like to small talk, and I love when strangers don't. I love when we can, it's easier, if I'm on stage and I have a microphone, it is easier, but this can happen in daily life as well, where you can, if we both just agree to relate.
Yeah.
To just
take a bit of a chance and
right. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. I actually love it when it's a very small thing, but we just have acknowledged each other's humanity, and we might, you just say, if there was a context within which we saw each other every day, maybe we'd be friends, or if we worked together or whatever, if I were, I just think it's such a gift when you can connect with someone and you know nothing about each other, but you believe in each other's humanity. And the thing about live performance and gathering people in a space is that my goal and calling and why I love being a performer is that we've agreed to enter this space together within which I want you to trust me that we're going to grieve and celebrate together. That's our deal, right? And as an audience member, my favorite shows are when you get, everybody is moving together and understanding sort of we can zoom out and see it all for what it is. And then we can zoom in and feel it all for what it is. And it's made more beautiful because we are strangers.
Yeah, there's like almost like sort of an implicit contract, you know? And that I'm not sure that I guess I am sure that not every performer or musician sort of sees it the way that you do, but but what a different kind of experience to be in your audience and to have that contract around relation is what you said, which I was thinking, yeah, like just how rich and this idea of strangers, we grow up, don't talk to strangers, stranger danger. And then all of a sudden, everybody to whom I've asked this question has had a notion of strangers as like opportunity, especially those of you who are in performance or have restaurants. Like you trade in strangers, right? Like that's who comes to see your music and eat your food. And like what is it that happens? Like there was a bus driver that was just getting off his shift. This is last week. I was walking my dog, and like I had a podcast going, but I thought to silence it because I could tell that he was sort of making eye contact with me, and on that small talk stuff, he could have said anything, but he said something along the lines of like, "What a good looking dog. He must mean the world to you." And it was like
Oh,
not small talk. And he had
right.
just been quilled by a porcupine the week before. So I had confronted that he means the total world to me. And so we ended up having this just like 5 minute, maybe 3.5 minute exchange. And we broke that sound barrier of relation so quickly in exactly the way not of course exactly the way you've described it concerts, but in that way of like zoom in and then zoom out and then zoom back in, and how I felt so buoyed
Yeah.
by it, by a total stranger who I like will never see again. It's not a bus that I would take, like,
Right?
yeah,
Yeah. I love that. That's such a sweet moment. And it
yeah.
makes you wonder, what, like, why not believe that that was the destiny, you know? And yeah, I love what you're saying, that just when it's just amazing when simultaneously both people forget that we're supposed to have defenses up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Or you just like, you don't mean to, but you disarm each other. And
And then let it, yeah.
yeah.
That's a beautiful. So this last question is actually sort of kind of on theme with this sort of connection. And I always ask it because I just like love a shared meal. My husband's a great chef, and just like, love to have people in our home.
Yeah.
And so this idea of like breaking bread together is a way of going from strangers to connection. And I love to ask, if you were hosting kind of a dream dinner party, what would you serve?
What
There's
would I
always the question of
serve?
like, well, yeah, there's always the question of
Yeah.
who would be at the table, but I'm actually like, what would you serve? Like, what's the spread that like fosters that connection? And don't worry about
Yeah.
prep because this is dream. Like you can put
Okay.
anything on
Dream.
that table you
Okay.
want.
Fantastic. I love thinking about this because food is vital to me, and in the same way, and I
Mm,
love that so much. And I think a lot of musicians have a really strong connection to food, and we're so lucky to get to tour and experience people's hospitality in so many different ways. But my favorite communal dish and event when I was young, and you know, growing up, a lot of things were tough, but the one thing that, the brightest beacons of my childhood were always these raucous gatherings when I was younger, like, very young till about 11, where it'd be a cookout, and all of my parents' friends who felt like family. Everyone's just running around. The men are drinking, playing cards. But there's this whole rockfish that actually sometimes someone would have just gone to like the Potomac and caught, or either gone to the seafood market in DC, the fresh
yeah.
fish market that my mom would go to sometimes, or like a family friend would have somehow caught a rockfish somewhere
In the Potomac,
in the
or I mean, like
Potomac.
right there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they show up, and you grilled the whole fish, and it's and then the dressing of it's like scallion sauce, just fresh scallion in oil, and then chopped roasted peanuts, right? And then, like, of course, vats of fish sauce that would be available for dipping and then drizzling. And then everybody has the rice paper and you're rolling,
Mm.
you're making your own fish rolls with vermicelli noodles and all these fresh herbs. You have mint and Thai basil and that's one of my favorites. And to have everybody in action while in discourse, it does loosen things up in this different way. And when I host, I don't host that much because I travel a lot for work, but when I do, I've not done this yet. And I really want to have everybody involved in everyone's making their own bite, but it's just buzzing. The table is buzzing. Everyone's asking for something all the time, and that's what I would serve.
I love it. I hadn't thought of it, but it's like that action does create discourse. Like, I love that notion. I mean, I'm thinking of like the Ethiopian platters, and everybody has their own injera, and I'm reaching over you for the tibs, and you're reaching over me for the lentils. And it's right. Like, when you're in motion and kind of creating your bite, as opposed to this sort of like stayed plate that's just in front of you.
Right.
It brings a dynamism to the table in a way that I had never like connected those two. It's like, it's real. It's beautiful. It like really, and with kids too, I feel like it's been so fun with my daughters to like get them into those tables where they're building bites that like you can't imagine, or overstuffing tacos or what. I mean, like, that's the comical element of it.
Yeah,
but,
totally. Yeah. And what's cool is that what I love about my family gatherings is no one's really talking about anything. There's no prevailing conversation because food is paramount. Food is the first thing. But everyone's constantly checking on one another around, like, what do you need? Do you need this? Do you need that? Like, or like you have one of my aunts is like, don't do it like that, do it like this. But everybody, everyone's talking,
Right.
but it's about food.
Yeah.
And then all the kids are being taught how to, being taught how to eat and how to share. And it's beautiful.
That was a great reflection. Thank you. I love to we end on that note. That was beautiful. And this conversation, I mean, I hope the listener, I'm going to say this because I want the listener to know that I don't think you and I have exchanged a word before this conversation started. We had, our colleagues kind of getting us together and finding this time. And obviously we're like so honored that someone of your busyness and caliber was like, yeah, I'll do this podcast. I'll explore this notion of not really strangers. And so I feel like you kind of took a chance with me and with us on this. I really appreciate that. And I'm like really proud of where we went. I'm proud of like how we sort of agreed that we were going to put the defenses down and just have like a really authentic exchange.
I feel so lucky to have been able to speak with you today. And that's testimony to how you're running this ship, right? Like as soon as we logged on, I could tell that we were going to have a real conversation and a truly humane one. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work you're doing. And it's vital and it's heartbreaking. And I'm honored to be any part of it.
Thank you. Onwards.
All right.
Thanks so much for listening. Your time is valuable, and it means a lot that you've chosen to spend it here. You can find today's show notes, including how to connect with today's guest, at unrefugees.org/notreallystrangers. That's unrefugees.org/notreallystrangers. While you're there, I hope you'll consider making a donation to the organization I lead, USA for UNHCR, to help us provide more support for refugees here in the US and around the world. If this episode was impactful, please take a moment to review the show and share the episode with a friend or family member. This small action will help us have a much bigger impact. Thanks so much. Don't be a stranger.